and welcome to my channel. I'm Tiffany, a retired librarian turned homeschool mom, and this is the third video in a series of homeschool legal videos that I am doing. So this one will cover the United States with kind of not quite so complicated as my previous video, but they're kind of semi-complicated laws. So again, I am not a lawyer. I am not an expert in education law, and this is very much an overview. So please check your states. This information is coming from a website for a curriculum called Time for Learning. It was the easiest non-religious place I could find all the information I needed. The other stuff that's coming up is very much part of religious organizations, in particular the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, which is basically the homeschool equivalent of neo-Nazis. So, and skinheads. You don't want to deal with those people. They're alt-right Christians and they're crazy. So a Time for Learning seemed to be the best place I could find it without stepping into religious areas. As a secular homeschool, as a person who is not really religious, I don't want to go there. And again, the Homeschool Legal Defense Association is a hardcore Christian, crazy, right-wing, supports possibly overthrowing the government kind of thing. So we're going to be covering the states that have not quite the craziness of California, New York, even West Virginia, but they're still a little bit more complicated. So let's start off with Colorado. So here we go, Colorado homeschool laws. So let's see, the requirements for homeschooling or schooling in general. This is a state that has, you have to educate your kids between 6 and 17. So let's see. Yes, options for homeschooling to avoid truancy. So that's the thing, is I do not believe there's registration for Colorado here. So no, they do have a notice of intent. So they must file 14 days before the family intends to homeschool. So it should be signed by a parent. That includes the name, ages, addresses, and number of hours of attendance for any children who will be registered in the homeschool. They must be done by the parent or guardian or adult relative. They must receive instruction in a minimum of subjects of reading, writing, speaking, mathematics, history, civics, literature, science, and the U.S. Constitution. They need to teach for at least 172 days in the year for at least 4 hours a day. So they must keep records for each student. And it must be kept permanently by the parent and should include attendance, test and evaluation results, and immunization results. They also must, here's why it's difficult, nationally standardized tests in grades 3, 5, 7, 9, and 11, or be evaluated by a qualified person. And they must submit all test scores to the school district where the notice of intent was filed. So that's why it's a little bit more difficult. They're a little bit more specific, and again, there's these standardized tests. So yeah, it's an official standardized test, including the SATs and various other things. So they have specific ones. And let's see, record keeping, whole school report cards. They have to keep a high school transcript for high school students and examples of works by grade level. I don't know how that works for unschoolers. I'm sure they figure something out or make something up. So yeah, so that's pretty much it. There's also graduation requirements and all sorts of information. This website, despite the fact that it's advertising a curriculum that I have no clue about because I have a toddler and we're unschoolers and we may not use curriculums at all, it does have quite a bit of good information. But that is Colorado. So moving on to Delaware. So their homeschooling requirements is you must register with the Department of Education. They have an annual enrollment at the beginning of the year, so you have to register every year. And then you have to report attendance at the end of the school year on or before July 31st. So that kind of makes it a little bit more difficult. Let's see. They do have a multifamily option, but that's interesting. So eventually you can do it in a co-op where one person registers everybody. So let's see. They must register to be homeschooled before the child is withdrawn from school. Makes sense, otherwise they're going to think your child has disappeared. So let's see, they don't require parents to keep records, though it is advisable for a homeschool family to keep portfolios. So, yeah. Helps monitor student progress, blah, 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 blah. All right. And graduation requirements, there aren't any. So occasionally it's, let's see, nope. So mainly it's the registration, and then you have to do it every year, and then you have to keep attendance, and you have to turn in the attendance. So that's what makes it more complicated than just states that require registration. So that is Delaware. Moving on to Georgia. So let's see. Georgia homeschool laws. Here we go. School requirements. The parents must have a high school diploma, which I approve of. They must submit an annual declaration of intent to utilize a home study program by September 1st, or within 30 days of establishing their homeschool. Names, ages, addresses, typical paperwork. They must provide a basic academic education program of 5 subjects: math, science, English, language arts, social studies, and reading. So that's why it's a little bit more complicated. They must teach no less than 180 days a year, at least 4.5 hours a day, unless the child is physically unable. Let's see, they must, another standardized testing. So they must have their child participate in standardized testing every 3 years or after completing 3rd grade. So, and the parent or instructor must write an annual progress assessment reports for each subject for each student and keep these records for at least 3 years. So, again, declaration of intent here. So let's see, yeah, recommend submitting homeschool declaration of intent electronically. That's always a good thing. So let's see, record keeping. So they do want you to keep a portfolio and keep records here, and then graduation requirements, and that's it. So a little bit more paperwork, more testing. So that is Georgia for you. Moving on to Indiana. So let's see, Indiana. This one states you must educate your child between 7 to 18 or until graduation. So that's compulsory laws. So let's see, homeschool requirement. Let's see, yeah, instruction is it? Let's see, mandated by law. So in educating at home. So there are 4 things here. So should be 180 days of instruction, should be in English. They must keep attendance records, and these records should be made available to the superintendent upon request. And instruction should be the equivalent to that provided in public schools. Equivalent education is not defined. So there is no registration, but you do have to keep records, and the superintendent of your county or school district can request them at any time. So let's see. Yeah, there's no legal requirement for families to register with the state before beginning homeschool. Yet the Department of Education provides homeschool enrollment to their website. So essentially, you probably want to, just so they don't realize you're truant and they're going to come after you and then think you're abusing your kids or not sending them to school. So probably a good idea. Again, they can also request these attendance records at any time. So let's see. Yeah, the attendance records are the only things that are required. So that looks like it. They do, again, recommend keeping a portfolio. The portfolios that keep popping up, these are good if you intend to send your kid to college. I mean, even my state, the 2 universities that accepts homeschoolers without a high school diploma do typically ask for both test scores and a portfolio. And I'm guessing most of this, is high school. They're not really interested in the elementary school stuff, because if you're showing off high school work, they know they got the basics down. So that is it for Indiana. So yeah, it's the fact that you have to keep those records, and even though you don't have to register, you still have to keep those records, and basically you can be called on at any time. So, and it doesn't look like there's any testing requirements in Indiana. So that makes it a little bit more complicated, because you do have to keep records. And I don't know how true this is in Indiana, whether they call on them or not. Again, I'm going to recommend, just by looking at the site, that you do register anyway, just to keep the government from coming after your kids. So let's move on to Iowa. So let's see, Iowa homeschool laws. So is this a registration, Kate? Let's see, 7 through 15 are required to educational instruction. It's interesting, a little bit younger there. So let's see. So they have a couple reasons. So this is a little bit more complicated. You can register as an independent private instruction method, or IPI. So you have to write a request to the local superintendent Provide a report containing homeschool location, name of students, primary instructor, name and authority responsible for independent instruction, a bunch of other information, subjects. There's no annual systems required, so the district can provide standardized testing at no cost, though. Let's see, this is talking about dual enrollment is not allowed. In some states, and I'm not always going to bring this up because it has to do with more extracurricular. Sometimes the state requires the schools to allow kids, sometimes they don't, sometimes it's up to discretion. So you can also, let's see, competent private instruction, which I'm guessing is a tutoring option here, so with an opt-out of reporting, which is kind of interesting. So if you do a private tutor who's a licensed practitioner, so let's see, yeah, these guys are required to submit paperwork and immunization records, and then there's a non-licensed person. Again, they must kind of submit. Let's see. They can submit paperwork, but it's not required. And the student may participate in annual evaluations, but again, not required. So, and then they can do competent private instruction with opt-in reporting. So you can and can't. You both can and don't. I'm guessing it's always probably recommend, if you can register in your state, register that you're homeschooling, so they're basically, people aren't checking up on you, not necessarily. So that doesn't, of course, qualify for world schools or road schoolers, but it depends on how long you're there. So there's a bunch of different options, which is the reason I probably have it set as semi-complicated, because there's a whole bunch of ways you can homeschool in this state. So you also have competent private instruction with a teacher you select, competent private instruction to opt into report, and competent private instruction with homeschool assistance program. So that's kind of interesting. So there is no filing of notice that is required. Let's see, yeah, you have the 5 options to legally homeschool your child. Depending on the homeschool option you decide, you may go with, you may or not need to file paperwork. Let's see, record keeping is, they're not required to submit the records, but it is, again, recommended you do maintain records. So attendance records, health records, parents have a tendency to hold on to health records anyway, at least if they're competent. Assignment records is basically the portfolio kind of thing, particularly, and create transcripts once kids reach high school. So that's why Iowa is just a little bit more complicated, because they have a bunch of different ways to do it. So let's move on to Kansas, or Kentucky, sorry, wrong state. So let's see. Requirements to homeschool. So children must be schooled between the ages of 6 and 18. So let's see. So you can include an enrollment in a public, private, church, or homeschool. So it does look like, yeah, you have to notify the Board of Education in your county within 10 days of being homeschool, the school year of homeschool. So you have to register every year. So a little bit more complicated. Keep attendance records, which is pretty common, along with scholarship reports, okay, schoolwork. And teach a minimum school term of 1,062 instructional hours, okay? And then you have to teach reading, writing, spelling, grammar, history, mathematics, civics to your homeschooler. These are the minimums. You can obviously teach more subjects. All right, and then if they're already enrolled, it's a good idea to let your school know and formally withdraw. A little bit common sense. So that's it. Looks like, yeah, you send notification, you keep records. Doesn't look like there's standardized testing. No, I do not see standardized testing in requirements for this one. So, and that is it. So they're a little bit more complicated, but there is no standardized testing, and you do have to register every year. So that is Kentucky. Let's move on to Louisiana. And of course, Louisiana is funny because French. So let's see. So you have to school between the ages of 7 and 18. You have to register with the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education and get approved home study program. Yeah, they're going to be a little bit more complicated. And then they register as a non-public school, not seeking state approval. So one, you can get approval. Second times, you have to register as a non-public school, not seeking state approval. So let's see. Oh, go down here. Requirements for homeschooling depends on which way you do it. To register as a non-public school, low regulation. Only requirement for this method is to use the online registration form and share with the Department of Education the chosen name of your school and total number of students. So you are registering as a school, and contact information to school administrator, the parent in charge, and yeah, has to be renewed yearly, so that makes it a little bit more difficult. So every year you have to register as a school. The second option, the homeschooling with Board of Elementary and Secondary Education approved study program, is a little bit more difficult. So the primary laws of families must comply with this option. They have to do completing, submitting home application, including the copy of the child's birth certificate. Let's see, have received their approval letter. Let's see, they have to renew every year. Renewal applications must use documentation verifying the home study program offered sustained curriculum of a quality of at least equal to the offered in public schools at the same grade level. So verification, particularly it's a portfolio or standardized test exam. So let's see, and that's it. So record keeping, you can keep the portfolio, which again is recommended, particularly if you want to go to college. Apparently they can do tax deductions if you're a homeschool here, so that's interesting. And let's see, no specific graduation requirements, so that is it. So yeah, there are two options. You still have to register every year, so it makes it a little bit more complicated than some other states. And again, the two-part option. So let's move on to Maine. Maine is somewhat less complicated. So you have to file a notice of intent to homeschool with the superintendent, submit an annual letter of instruction every year. Basic subjects: English, language arts, math, science, social studies, physical education, health education, library skills. Interesting. I always, as a librarian, support that. Library skills are highly important, even in this day and age. Fine arts, Maine studies in at least one grade from 6 to 12, so they have to learn the history of their state. Pretty common in schools. And computer proficiency, can't speak here, in one grade level in grades 7 to 12. So that's always a good thing. Your children need to know how to use computers. It is 2021. Computers have been around since the 90s. People need to get on top of these things. And yes, it drove me crazy in my public libraries. I don't care if you're 50. Computers have been around for a while. Get over it. So you have to submit the following year assessments: year-end assessment, result of standardized test, and result of developed by local school officials, and letter stating a child's progress from a Maine certified teacher. This actually seems more complicated, but it is a little bit of paperwork. Probably less complicated than some states, though I could be double checking accidentally and hit Maine when I was already covered it. I'm gonna double. No, Maine is still semi-complicated. So despite all this stuff, probably far less complicated. I did the California, New York, and West Virginia review yesterday, and they are far more complicated than this. So let's see, record keeping, standardized test and achievement scores. Test results have to be sent to school officials, and renew progress, I believe, every year. Yeah, review and acceptance of students' progress by a Maine certified teacher, a homeschool group that includes a Maine certified teacher or administrator who has reviewed the portfolio of the student's work, or a local advisory board appointed by the superintendent, composed of 2 homeschool teachers and 1 school official. So this is how you basically get approved. So your kids have to be evaluated by one of these people. I'm sure there's homeschool groups all over Maine that kind of cover this. So yeah, require all subjects having been taught. Attendance for 175 days has been met, and demonstration of the child's progress in 2 work samples per quarter per subject. So a little bit more complicated than I thought. So let's see, that's there's no specific graduation requirements, and then it goes into enrolling back in public school. So let's move on to Maryland. Maryland homeschool laws. So let's see. Oh dear. Yeah, this is semi-complicated. There are 3 options here. You can homeschool under a portfolio option, homeschool under a church umbrella option, homeschooling under a state-approved school umbrella option. So let's see. So under the portfolio option, you have to file a notice of consent with your superintendent and then teach the basic required subjects: math, English, social studies, science, art, music, health, physical education. So these things vary by state. You required instruction, provided the required instruction that is of sufficient duration. Okay, I doubt they define that. They must maintain a homeschool portfolio, pretty common, and again, something I recommend if your kids are college bound or even consider college bound. Basically contains the child's writing worksheets, tests, etc. They must meet with the superintendent as requested to review the child's portfolio. And yeah, these meetings can be requested no more than 3 a year. So eventually, I doubt the superintendent is bugging homeschoolers all that much unless they're very, very nosy. I hope they have better things to do. So the second one is homeschooling under a church umbrella option. Now, this is the first time Alabama brings up this umbrella option, specifically the church umbrella option. So this is essentially, they're almost like cover schools. So you register to be part of the school and you homeschool your kid, though this one is religious. So you file a notice of consent with your superintendent. Again, that's normal. You have the church umbrella supervisor instruction, which includes reviewing lesson plan, annual visits to the site of instruction, and periodic conferences. So essentially, they're monitoring you, and you're probably following a curriculum that's Christian-based, and then verify your involvement in the church umbrella. This includes notifying them that you plan on staying involved, and if you are moving or going to stop homeschooling. So you let them know. Essentially, it's like a school. So then you have the homeschooling under a state-approved school umbrella option. So in order to homeschool under this option, families must first have their local school assign a teacher that will issue progress reports as well as grade papers. So essentially, you're working with a teacher. So again, you send a notice of intent. You verify your involvement in the state-approved school umbrella. This includes notifying them that you plan to stay involved in essentially like a school. So you're assigned a teacher, and that one monitors. That is similar to kind of what I did when I was a kid, though I was not in Maryland, where my mother chose a curriculum where things were mailed off to a teacher, and she graded them. So I have no idea. I did that for 1 year. Me and my mother drove each other crazy. Then I went to a deranged Christian school, and that drove me to paganism for many years, as well as some other issues. Yeah, my teenhood was not fun, and my parents were crazy, and probably still are. So let's see. All right. Homeschool record keeping depends on what your plan is and the school options, what record keeping you do. They do have to keep attendance and samples of student work and grades and other pertinent information. So keep tracks. Again, portfolios are a good idea. So let's see. And that's pretty much it for Maryland. So it's a little bit more complicated than some of these states. Possibly should have gone in my other video, but Maryland. Michigan. Next state. So there are two options for homeschooling in Michigan. You register as a non-public school or as a home education program. So as a non-public school, let's see, has specific requirements associated with it. Subjects can only be taught by a certified teacher or claim religious exemption to this requirement, which makes this kind of pointless, and must be compatible with the curriculum taught in the local district for your child's age and grade level. If the superintendent of public instruction's office requests it, you must be willing to provide information requiring enrollment of pupils, courses of study, and qualifications of teachers. So I'm not sure if that qualifies for the religious exemption, but I wish that wasn't there, because there shouldn't be religious exemptions for anything. Religious people can be very, very crazy, except for some maybe very few things, but no, not with education. Okay, as a home education program, teaching your child under home education program does not require any type of reporting, so this is probably the one that's most commonly used. And you don't need to go through an enrollment process. You simply begin homeschooling, feel ready to do so. However, you must include instruction in subjects of reading, spelling, mathematics, science, history, civics, literature, writing, and English grammar. So let's see. This is just access to services, record keeping. They don't require homeschoolers to maintain specific records. Again, it's a good idea to keep a portfolio. Let's see, does it require standardized testing? Let's see, nope. Though it does say, recommends that you keep standardized tests if they're taken, report cards and stuff like that. But that is Michigan, so it's semi-complicated because it has two options. I'm guessing most people just deal with the as home education program rather than doing the non-public school. Seems far less paperwork. All right, let's move on to Montana. Montana has homeschool require parents to do the following. Okay, so this is another one where you have to notify the county superintendent. If I remember something else that I read, if you don't have a superintendent, you notify the Department of Records, I believe. So you must maintain attendance and immunization records. Homeschool is a location that compels the local health and safety regulations. So your building must be safe when you're teaching your children. It's always a good recommendation. If your building isn't safe, you probably shouldn't be homeschooling or living there since it's your home. Provide organized course of study that includes required subjects and teach the required hours of instructions every year. So 720 hours per school fiscal year for grades 1 through 3 and 1,080 hours for grades 4 through 12. Families must also teach the same subjects as public schools for their students' grade. Okay, I don't know how they check that, but that is English, math, social studies, science, health, arts, and career education. Okay, career education, interesting. Their parents are free to choose whatever curriculum they want or none, possibly. Record keeping. They only require parents to keep attendance and immunization records in case the superintendent requests them. Though it's a good idea, again, to keep portfolios. And that is it. Let's see. Nope, the homeschoolers, if they want to learn a high school component, they can take some standardized tests. But that's pretty much it for Montana. Let's move on to North Carolina. So let's see. Maybe a regulation state. So register. Parents must have at least a high school diploma. Always benefiting of that. It's a good idea to have a high school diploma before you decide to teach your kids. They must file a notice of intent to homeschool with the North Carolina Department of Non-Public Education. They need to keep attendance and immunization records. Pretty common. Not to mention, parents should be keeping their child's immunization records anyway, and then turn them over to their children once they turn 18. Let's see. Homeschool students should take national standardized test each year. That's why it's semi-complicated, and keep results on record for 1 year. Homeschool should operate in regular schedule of at least 9 months of the school year. And let's see, they should notify the Department of Non-Public Education when they're closing their homeschool. I don't know how that works with unschoolers. Could be different, or road schoolers, but if they're staying in North Carolina for however long. But again, they notify when they're done. There are people who do year-round schools, but again, they probably just fudge it if they're not doing that. So, but let's see. Notice of intent, which is pretty common. Record keeping, they have to typically keep a portfolio. Again, I recommend this. Subject covered, parent administered, or report cards, standardized test scores, and then high school transcript for 9 through 12. What you keep in your portfolio is up to you. Normally it's just this kid's schoolwork, but this is what their requirements are saying. This just goes over to graduation requirements. This site does have a decent amount of good information, but that is North Carolina for you. Now on to Tennessee, and we're almost done with these guys. So Tennessee has 3 specific ways they can educate their children from home. You can register as an independent homeschool, as a church-related umbrella school, and as enrolling in an accredited online school. And that always, to me, is kind of iffy whether you're actually homeschooling or not, because parents aren't as involved in the online schooling. So let's see. So the independent homeschool option, you need to provide an annual notice, so every year. The parent instructor must have a high school diploma or GED. Again, I recommend that as well. Maintain attendance records and send to the director of schools at the end of the school year proof of vaccinations and standardized tests for grades 5, 7, and 9. So the church-related schools, basically, you're under their control. You register with them, and they do the paperwork. The accredited online school, kind of self-explanatory. You register in a school, they take care of the paperwork because you're technically not homeschooling, you're being part of an online school. So again, just in case people are wondering, and I mentioned this in another video, what parents have been doing COVID-19 is crisis schooling, not homeschooling, and it's not really an online school unless the school is specifically, unless they're changing things around. If they're still doing school through their typical public school, only it's online, it's still crisis schooling and not homeschooling. There's a major difference. Okay, that's it. So basically for the record keeping, there's attendance records, grades of progress reports, results of standardized testing, and the high school transcript, which is all pretty common. So that is Tennessee. And last but not least on this list is Virginia. So let's see, what does Virginia do? So again, they have a compulsory attendance law between the ages of 5 and 18. Parents can homeschool, obviously, in lieu of school attendance. So they have to send a notice of intent, pretty common. And they have to have evidence at least one of the following: parent holds a high school diploma or equivalent or higher. Parent holds a teacher certification. Student will be enrolled in a correspondence course / distance learning program, or evidence that the parent is able to provide adequate instruction of a child, which is interesting. How that works. So submission of a list of subjects to be studied in the coming year, and evidence of academic progress submitted by August 1st. So again, a bunch of paperwork here. So let's see, you can do it under a certified tutor option, which the tutor is must be certified in the state of Virginia. The teacher certification must be approved by the superintendent. Any parent or non-parent who is certified to teach the student. Any parent or non-parent who is certified. Okay, so the parent can teach as a certified teacher. Instruction can take place in or outside the home, and there's no yearly assessment or notifications required, as long as the teacher's credentials are up to date. So then of course they have to have these deranged religious exemptions. I really don't like religious exemptions. So have a sincere conviction against sending their child to school. That sounds like you want to abuse your kid. Not based on those conviction on political, sociological, or philosophical views, or merely personal moral code. So this really has to be strictly religious. And be prepared to provide proof of your conviction to Virginia School Board. So eventually you have to argue that, yes, we're religiously crazy. God, I hope they don't approve that all that often, because this sounds nuts and probably should be removed, because you can't be religiously opposed to education, because that's just wrong. You're legally required to educate your children. You're not homeschooling. You're just idiots, or abusive idiots, and indoctrination. Again, I go over that in a video. I like to rant and rave about deranged parents taking their kids out to abuse their children under the claim of religion and homeschooling, rather than to actually educate their children. And yes, unfortunately, they do that. There's enough people on Reddit in the unschooling or homeschooling things that complain that their parents have pretty much abandoned them. But again, I do not like these religious exemptions. I do not believe they should exist. You do have to do with regular, normal parents. Do not oppose to send a literally letter of intent to homeschool by, so let's see. Family can be in any time they want, but they have to send a letter by the 15th of August. So let's see. Yeah, you have to send in the paperwork. As far as I know, any sane parents who are homeschooling have no problem letting the government know, oh, by the way, we're going to be doing this. So, and there's a little bit of record keeping here, doing standardized results of nationally standardized tests. If you're doing them, you probably want to keep them. And then evaluation of the assessments, particularly if your kids are college bound. So SATs, ACTs, I'm not particularly fond of them, but we'll see with our own child. So that is it for Virginia, and that is it for this. So let's get back here. So again, if you've noticed, I don't like the religious exemption laws, and I'm going to say this, I'll probably say this multiple times throughout this channel, and I believe I said this again in my original review. Homeschooling is not an excuse to take your child out of school and ignore them, or make them just do nothing but study the Bible or any other religious text, you actually have to educate your kid. If you want a religious exemption, you're not planning to educate your kid. You're just being irritating. Most parents who are planning to actually homeschool probably have absolutely no problem filling out some basic paperwork and saying, oh, we're homeschooling. And even unschoolers, it's pretty easy to make up because you realize you're covering these subjects when you think about it. That's not so they're not interested in the excuses. At least I would hope not. They intend to actually homeschool their children. So the religious exemption laws irritate me. They shouldn't exist. But again, that's the states that are a little bit more paperwork. So from here on out, things are going to get easier to homeschool in these different states. So that is it for this video. If you like what you hear and like what you see and want to see more of my reviews, or want to see my book reviews, which are another major part of this channel, or our travel reviews, which eventually I will get up, like and subscribe. Thank you.